2024. This is the budget hearing for the preliminary budget proposal for the School District of Waukesha for the 2024-25 school year. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ms. Ettinger, can you take the roll call, please?
Mark Borowski,
Here.
Eric Brooks.
Here.
Thomas Harland,
Here.
Betty Koenig.
Here.
Carrie Kozlowski.
Here.
Diane Voigt.
Here.
David Wad.
Here.
Anthony Zenobia.
Here.
Kelly Piasek.
Here. All right. As I mentioned tonight, we are going to start by having Mr. Darren Clark provide a summary of the 24-25 preliminary budget. After that, we will open up the meeting to the public for input. So, Mr. Clark.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, each year at this time, we present the budget hearing, and this is a chance for the community to have feedback on the current status of the development of the 24-25 budget cycle. This work began last November and won't be finalized until late October, when the board will act on the final property tax levy and budget. The preliminary budget has been published in the Waukesha Freeman with copies available in the business office located here at the Blair Administration Building, and it's also on our district website. Let's try to get this. Resume. Get this to go big. Face that. I'm not displaying good. Just 1 second. I love technology. All right, we'll abandon that. Just 1 second. Slideshow. Okay, so as I was saying, this is our annual meeting, and this is our chance for community feedback on the budget process to date. So I'm going to hit on just a few topics within the budget, starting with enrollment and then some budget highlights, and then some comparison between the last two fiscal years, because with ESSER and a lot of other things, if you look actuals to this budget in our budget book document, it's going to look a little off at times. And then obviously we'll touch on the tax levy and preliminary rate, and then long-term debt. I think we have a good story to tell that I thought we'd share tonight. Anytime we talk budget, we spend a lot of time, and oftentimes people will say, well, we don't hear about you talking about enrollment, but I just want to ensure the public, we talk about enrollment nearly on a monthly basis, at least as a cabinet, and certainly periodically as a board through either the committees or board meetings in particular. And we've been going down, this is our third Friday count that we do every September to develop how much revenue we can generate via the tax levy and state aid. In 2012's fall count, we had 13,143 students. This past year, we had 10,899 students, and we're projecting a decrease of 2% below that as well. And this is not a Waukesha thing. This is a statewide and even national thing. If you've listened to recent news stories, it's also becoming a college-level issue as colleges are scrambling to secure enrollment as well. So we factor all this in, and actually just recently we had another enrollment projection done that shows that this will continue for the next multiple years, 5 to 8 years. So hopefully that'll shift, but we're not seeing that yet in the data. The 2024-25 revenue limit, we will multiply this number by the number of resident kids that I just talked about. So for this year, the revenue limit authority is allowed to increase by $325 to $11,325, and this is all set in state statute. So this is a nice increase, larger than it's been, but when you're declining enrollment, that increase is offset. As I mentioned before, in September of 2024, in a couple of weeks, we'll be doing our third Friday count, and we're predicting a 2% drop from the previous year. And what does that mean? It means as a district, we're looking at 184 resident student drop from 23-24. You multiply that by $11,325 per student, and it's a sizable drop. The other thing that goes into our tax levy and revenue limit projection that often makes our revenue limit projection look, doesn't tell the true story what's happening here, is all the voucher programs run through our revenue limit, and then they run through our tax levy, and then we get a bill, we send the money to the state, and then they disperse it out to the voucher program schools. We're projecting a 15% increase in those line items within the revenue limit as well. Here's the high-level preliminary budget. Total expenditures of $223,200,835 and revenues of $215,578,258. So this is the adoption format. The largest funds, Funds 10 and 27, are really the operational budget that most people feel and live throughout the year. It's our staff, it's our students, it's busing, it's utilities, it's special ed, it's regular ed. And then the other auxiliary funds are more defined and more succinct and kind of invisible within our daily operation. Things as capital maintenance and food service and community service to add up to the numbers before you. Fund 10 revenues are set to decrease from last year by $4.4 million, or 2.66%. Fund 10 expenditures are set to decrease by $12 million. And this is primarily due to two things. The expenditure of ESSER funds. We have now fully expended and reported out our ESSER allocations. So that's leaving the revenue and the expense side of the budget. We also authorized last year the use of fund balance in Fund 10 for some one-time projects, which we'll touch on in a little bit here. So those things are driving this significant decrease in the Fund 10 revenues and expenditures. The special education budget is set to increase by 7.97% as we continue to move resources to those students identified in our special ed program. A lot of that is tied to special ed staffing and trying to secure those staff, and the increase in transportation costs related to special ed as well. The budget also reflects the employee compensation and benefit plans that the board has approved over the last several months as we built towards this preliminary budget and ultimately the final budget. And most importantly, we're in full compliance of the state of Wisconsin revenue limit legislation. A couple of other things related to this budget. The budget currently contains continued defeasance or pre-funding of Fund 39 long-term debt payments. That defeasance amount this year as it stands is an additional $665,219. This doesn't happen often. We have two funds that if you looked at last year's financials to what we're looking at for 24-25, we have two funds that are simply fading away. Years ago, we had some non-referendum approved debt that was tied to some energy ed programs that the board approved, and our Fund 43 referendum projects, those are all done and have been done. So they're no longer included in our booklet as well. There's no funds left no dollars left in these funds, and there hasn't been expenditures in 2 years, so our look-back period within our financial document is that 2-year period, so our book is a little thinner. One fund I would call out, and this goes back to the board approving what we called Phase 3.0 capital improvement projects last year, which included projects like the south bleachers, auditorium improvements at all 3 high schools, chiller improvements at West. I shouldn't start listing them because then I never can complete them all, but a wide variety of projects. And some of those, the dollars have been placed in Fund 41 last fiscal year, and expenditures with any big capital improvement project crosses the fiscal year because our fiscal year ends on June 30th. Summer is the time a lot of this work's done. So if you look at that, you'll see a significant amount of fund balance being spent down. But it's all according to the plan that was approved last fall. A couple of other things that differentiate 23-24 versus fiscal year 24-25. And 23-24, we did one-time stipends. We're not doing that this year, so that was an adjustment. That was coming out of fund balance. And then we fully funded several projects out of Fund 10 fund balance. Some of them I've already mentioned. The south bleachers and HVAC upgrades in their instructional area and field house. The north tennis courts and HVAC upgrades. The west chiller, the auditoriums I mentioned. The district and the board also approved a new district-wide camera and building security system that was funded out of fund balance. And lastly, the closeout of the ESSER funds, where we set aside a significant investment in HVAC equipment throughout the district. But the nice thing in terms of how I look at things, one-time money, addressing one-time expenditures or long-term capital improvement. So to recap, because I do think it's something to celebrate, and since it's crossing both fiscal years, I'll take advantage of that. We've invested, or in the process of investing out of our own dollars, $15.7 million into our own facilities as we move forward into 24-25. And unlike some other approaches that have been used, we did not issue any debt for these projects to be completed. We did not ask our taxpayers for any additional revenue limit authority. This was years of savings, selling some assets and things like that made this possible. ESSER certainly helped in that regard, but as a lot of districts struggle, I think the board's approach on using ESSER with one-time expenditures has saved us some of the challenges that a lot of our neighbors are going through. So I think it was unique enough to slide in there for us to consider. If you watched our August F&F meeting, we talked a lot about an increase in the levy or decrease. We spent a lot of time, for only being a couple percent range of the discussion, and it really comes down to I think our desire to have it, at most a 1% levy increase. But I think when people look at what's included in the document, again, it's on the website for anyone who wants to look at. We settled on a 1% levy increase, but that's our best guess as to where the levy will come in. And I have a belief that it'll come in better than that, but this year there's just some oddities with aid, which is already the most difficult number to predict. The DPI comes out July 1 and presents an aid estimate, and it's based on your budget for last fiscal year. And they said 12% increase for Waukesha. That all sounds fantastic, and I would take that. If you've been following the media at all, MPS is struggling to report their financial activity to DPI. And like last year, that can impact the aid we get as a school district. So we proceeded with a 4% increase in state aid, thinking we're taking a very cautious approach to that number. We also have the advantage of looking at our defeasance level or our long-term debt funding. But there's other things involved with the amount of referendums that are out there, and all the state aid formula takes all of these things into consideration. We like to think that the 4% is going to be conservative. It'll actually come in a little higher, and there's an inverse relationship between state aid and the tax levy. So we're kind of envisioning it being better than the 1%, but quite honestly, especially with the MPS issue out there, I didn't feel comfortable recommending it in the board or the committee, and eventually the board didn't feel comfortable being too aggressive in that regard. So here's where we are in the proposed preliminary levy, a 1% levy increase over last year, and a tax rate decrease of 3.81% or 22 cents per $1,000 of home valuation. Again, we're striving to make that number even better, and hopefully we'll have good news come October 15th when our state aid is finalized. I think it's important to draw a little history on what we've done levy-wise. So this is only through 23-24 because I like working with numbers that were factual and final. So I didn't include the preliminary number, but over the last 3 years, the average change in the levy has been 2.52% negative. And then the 5-year and 10-year, the 5-year just over 1.25%, and the 10-year average change in the levy at 0.64%. So hopefully that tells a pretty good story on what we've been doing tax-wise in Waukesha. One other celebration is the debt picture for the district. In 2018, November of 2018, the district passed a $60 million referendum of bonded debt for facility and security improvements. At the F&F committee just this week, we talked about where next year's levy could be our last levy for debt service purposes. And with that would come interest savings, et cetera. and we have to date through refinancing and advance payments, we've already saved $1.7 million of interest costs from what was originally projected. And now we're looking towards, do we have enough reserves in hand to pay off the existing or remaining bonds on the call date of April 1st, 2026, which would save the taxpayers just over $500,000 more in interest. And that's interest avoidance. We'll never incur it, so we don't levy it. So you won't see it in a financial, it just disappears, so, as the spreadsheet changes. A couple months ago, I was asked to, as we talked about this good news about SDW being so close to being debt-free, I was asked to kind of compile some comparisons, because it's hard to do. People know their school, they know a little bit about their district, but they really have no feel as to what other districts generally are going about, especially debt. You don't have that feel. So this is the top 10 enrollment size districts. I added Janesville just because they used to be a top 10. I think they're right beyond the bubble, but beyond it being my hometown, I also know they're out for referendum. This is everyone's principal debt outstanding as of, I think it was August 22nd. And you can see that we're well below the average at a minimum. Milwaukee is without debt, but they also just passed a $252 million operational referendum question. So you can fund projects via that path if you choose. So I thought the zero was a little misleading when you look at total taxation. But the rest of this is just principal balances of bonded debt. Madison's at $268 million. Now they are significantly larger than us. They're looking for this coming election of issuing, $500 million. That sounds weird to say, but it's true. Green Bay is in the same position. Waukesha, we have $16.7 million of outstanding debt, but we also already have $6.5 million on hand for future payments that I didn't reflect because our true balance is 16.7. So the plan would be over the next 2 years that we levy $10 million and we are debt-free. Now, it won't be 5 and 5. Probably it'll be some combination of those. Eau Claire is out for an operational question, and Sheboygan is out for a significant one. Janesville, as I mentioned, is out for $152 million as well. And then we also did a comparison of Waukesha County, our peers, mainly the K-12 districts. I did add Arrowhead because they're obviously talking about issuing additional debt as well. And you can see the comparison. And two of the, Hamilton and Pewaukee, they haven't issued all their debt from their last referendum. So you can add $12 million to Hamilton's 45, just as an example. But again, I think we're in a very strong debt position, and one that should be pointed out. And with that, that concludes my very long and probably too detailed report. I don't get the mic often, so I take advantage.
Did you have any concluding comments, Darren, or?
No, I guess the one thing I forgot to mention, if the impact on that Fund 39 long-term debt levy going away, if you look at the preliminary budget and just say, all right, that's going to be our levy for the next 3 years, and if you just take out the Fund 39 portion, you'd be looking at a levy decrease of about 8.5%. So, and extrapolate that out to the rate, I mean, we'd be getting down to a rate that's probably around $5 per $1,000 value.
And Darren, you can confirm that the preliminary budget is in full compliance with state of Wisconsin revenue limit legislation?
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. All right, the public hearing this evening is an opportunity for the members of our school community to share their thoughts and provide input on the budget that's been presented. The final budget and tax levy will be approved and adopted at a future meeting in late October. Although tonight is the public's formal opportunity to provide input, I'd like to invite all the members of our school community to reach out to Mr. Clark at any point in the budget development process to share their thoughts and insights. If anyone was interested in speaking tonight, at this time, the board would receive comments from those wishing to speak to budget issues. Did anyone sign up to speak? No. All right. Therefore, again, thank you for all for the hard work putting this together, and we will continue to watch those numbers as they come in, and we will come back late October with our formal budget approval and adoption. That concludes our meeting for tonight. Thank you.